Going to take you through a couple of visuals. I'm a very visual person because I come from the world of media, so I don't actually have any writing most of the time on my slides, but I hope that you will take away from this experience. So the main image you can see is actually a photograph of me in my current work area. I work, as I mentioned earlier, in the Tana Delta, which is where Kenya's longest river meets the Indian Ocean. Very thick coastal forest, lots of indigenous and endemic species that we're trying very, very hard to protect. And what you see in the little caption picture on the left-hand side is actually one of my first experiences that led me to really living the life that I am in wildlife conservation. So this is my before picture. When I used to work in local media, I started working on radio actually as soon as I got out of high school. Some friends of mine and I had decided that we were going to meet up for a movie, like we were just going to go for a movie and then, ice cream later. And it just so happened that they all had gone for this open casting call where they were doing voice tests for a local radio station. And I had no idea. They just gave me like a meeting point. So I went there and it was raining really heavily outside. So I went into the office because that's where they all were. And yeah, they said to me, if you're going to sit in our office, then you have to do a voice test. And I did the voice test. And this was, I believe, on a Wednesday. And the following Saturday, I was just thrown on air. So I've really grown into the airwaves, as it were, and I really had a passion for radio and for media. But of course, as with any career path, you always try to move up the ladder. And when you're on radio, you're always aiming to get either a drive show or a breakfast show because those are primetime shows. And I was really fortunate to actually make it successfully onto a breakfast show on XFM, which is a rock station. And I did that for 3 years. And after that point, again, there was no growth for me in my career. And so I transitioned into television, where again, I felt like my passion for wildlife wasn't really being fulfilled. During the time that I was on radio, I would volunteer with different animal rescue groups and even at the animal orphanage, which, a disclaimer, on my next slide, you will see pictures of me with animals that are at the orphanage. I do not advocate at all for people taking selfies with wild animals, but for the purpose of just sharing my journey with you, I added that slide in. But you can see here what my life was like, very, very different. And the main image is actually a photograph that I took on my last broadcast day. If you look at the card, it says Walk for Wildlife, which kind of morphed into Walk with Rangers, which is now kind of the flagship program under my charity, which I'll tell you about a little later on. But yeah, here you can see what I did in my free time when I wasn't on the airwaves, all dolled up. I was really getting down and muddy with lots of different animals that came in from all sorts of different situations, most of them coming in from poaching situations where their mothers had been poached, or human-wildlife conflict cases. This lesser spot-nosed monkey that you see in this center picture on the top, though, she was actually a victim of the illegal wildlife trade. And I want to say that in working with these animals, of course, I formed a lot of attachments and bonds with them. And I just wanted the best for them, really. And the stories of what they'd gone through were quite harrowing and really broke my heart. But I did learn and kind of research on my own a lot about the illegal wildlife trade, about poaching, about human-wildlife conflict, the bushmeat situation. And so, you know, I just constantly was trying to find avenues to be more engaged in wildlife conservation. But this is what I would do on my free time, because this was the volunteer opportunity that I was able to get at the time. So shortly after, I was able to get, you know, to get accepted into an organization that had rangers on the ground in the Masai Mara. And this was an image, the one on the far left that you can see with the elephant. That was an image taken in 2008, where I joined an organization that I had actually tried to interview on my radio station. So to kind of fill that gap that I had with my passion with wildlife, I would actually use my platform on the media to raise awareness about conservation issues. I had an entire show just dedicated to wildlife, talking about all sorts of things, interviewing different organizations. So one day, this organization, which sadly is a little bit dormant now, you know, invited me to join them in the field, and I jumped at the opportunity because to be honest, at the time I hadn't visited the Mara for many, many years, and you know, it was kind of out of my reach financially. So jumped at the opportunity, but I had no idea what I was going to face when I was there. I thought I'm gonna have a great first camping experience. I'm gonna, you know, see lots and lots of wildlife and take great pictures and come back home. And within 15 minutes of us arriving in the Mara, actually, the rangers drove in into the camp, and I'm still fumbling around trying to figure out how to build a tent for the first time in my life. And they said, "We've heard gunshots, we need to go." And everyone's going into the ranger vehicle, and I'm thinking, hang on a minute, why are we going in the direction of gunfire? That doesn't seem like a very good idea. But on the other hand, I didn't want to be left alone in a field full of lions that could eat me, because I knew nothing about life on the ground at all, never camped in my life. So we all went, and we went to a place called the Dapoto Forest in the Masai Mara, and came across this freshly poached elephant. And as you can see, pretty mangled state. They cut off her ear to be able to carry the tusk with, presumably. And it just broke my heart. There was no way that I could unsee that or go back to my regular life in the media, just talking about actors and actresses and rock stars and the latest fashion trends. Like, none of that was computing in my brain as something that made sense for my audience. My audience needed to know about the reality that was ongoing in my country. You see, in Kenya, wildlife belongs to the people. The Kenya Wildlife Service is a custodian of wildlife on behalf of the people of Kenya. And so for me, even though I don't personally own any wildlife, I intrinsically feel a sense of responsibility and ownership of wildlife, and also in recognizing really deeply their, you know, their ecosystem value and their value to me as a person with my heritage, with just everything. So I felt really strongly about what I had seen. And so I would then continue to visit rangers in different parts of the country, volunteer with them on the ground, live with them in the bush. The image that you see on the far right is actually one of the ranger camps that I visited, and that's one of the wells that they have. This is actually in Tana Delta, where I'm currently working. Now we have a proper water tank with clean water, but this is what the rangers were drinking. And just seeing, you know, that these are the conditions rangers are living in, eating very basic food, earning in some cases as little as $40 a month. It just didn't sit right with me. I wanted to change things for wildlife, but then I also wanted their lives to be better because they really deserved it. I had worked with these men and women. Actually, when I started, there were no women. Now there are lots of women. You know, they were sacrificing so much of their personal selves, their time, their families, just to be able to protect these resources. So for me, it was just all about, what am I doing with my life? I cannot continue living my entire life talking about rock stars. I need to do something different. I need to make a change and have an impact that, you know, like I haven't just taken up space and breathed the air on this planet. I've done something to make a difference. And that's something I felt really strongly about. So again, just joining rangers on the field, learning firsthand from the ground what the challenges are. And of course, at the time between 2009, 2014, we were facing a huge spike in elephant poaching and the ivory trade. We, on average in Kenya, we at the time were losing about 8 elephants a day to poaching, which for me was just completely unacceptable. And talking about it on social media just didn't seem to be enough. I felt again, I need to do more. Like every time I took a step forward, I felt like this isn't enough, I need to do more. And I kept moving forward slowly and gradually in conservation. And so I started then writing for one of the local newspapers. Fortunately, at the time, my radio station was part of a media group, like a media house. And so we had a radio station, we had TV, and we had print media as well. So I went to see the CEO of the Star newspaper and I said, hey, Mr. Pike, I'm on the field. This is the kind of thing that I'm witnessing firsthand. Can you assign a journalist who I can work with, so every time I have a report, he can write about it and the public can know what is happening to their wildlife? And he just simply said to me, why don't you do it yourself? So I did. And this is one of the biggest stories that we had ever printed in the history of Kenyan media with regards to wildlife conservation and specifically poaching. There was an incident where, as you can see, we lost 3 elephants in Amboseli. And this was the first time that we were able to publicly name and shame a known poacher and bring him to justice. When this story was released, he actually ran across the border into Tanzania. And then we had to, KWS, along with, I believe, Big Life Foundation at the time, worked together with the Tanzanian authorities to find this poacher and bring him to justice. And I believe that was done. I'm not sure if he's still serving time, but I will make sure I find out about that and hopefully let you know in the next session. But yeah, this is basically what I used to do. Talk on the radio when I have my free time, go into the field, whatever I find on the field, I start writing in the papers about, but also I then started developing a very strong ranger network and also a journalist network. And so even though in some cases I wasn't able to write about these stories myself, I would disseminate the information to other journalists who would then carry the story. And of course, all of these stories were verified and then published. And, you know, there was a big movement at the time then in Kenya because Kenyans started to see this every single day. There wasn't a single day that there wasn't a story in the paper about an elephant being poached. And Kenyans started to feel very strongly about this. And they started getting engaged in, you know, anti-poaching campaigns and walks and, you know, fundraising and all sorts of things. And for me, myself, I then transitioned once again into a completely different realm where you know, the poaching story was being covered, but the ranger story wasn't being covered. And I felt like I was doing a bit of a disservice to rangers. In January of 2012, I personally, by that time, had lost my ranger colleagues who were shot by poachers. One of them managed to survive. And for me, seeing him in the hospital bed every day and helping him eat and drink, it was really harrowing. And I felt like I've got to do something about this. You know, people need to value rangers' lives more. And I felt like that wasn't being done. So I then decided to embark on a trek from Arusha in Tanzania to Nairobi in Kenya. We were going to do it in 2013, but there was a lot of you know, I still had to do some sections of the recce for the route mapping and everything else. And so we eventually had it in 2014. And we partnered with the ministry in Kenya and also the ministry in Tanzania. And they were very, very helpful. We did the trek through the Kilimanjaro flat. So we didn't actually use any tarmac road at all through the trek. and it took 15 days. I had 71 people from all over the world who just heard about it on Facebook and wrote to me and said, can we join you? And I said, look, I'm going to do this once in my life. It's going to be a shame if I deny this opportunity to everyone, because it is such a stunning route and such a kind of propelling force to get this word out to the global community that, one, we are losing our elephants at an unprecedented rate, both in Kenya and Tanzania, and two, rangers' lives matter. They're going through some real challenges on the ground. They're not getting recognized. They're not getting the support or equipment that they need. Let's come together, guys. Let's change this. And so the walk was really successful. We managed to obviously get all these people on board, and everyone was talking about it on social media, and we started to reach new audiences. At the same time, I had a fundraiser on just crowdfunding thing going on. I didn't think we would raise a lot. I thought maybe, I don't know, $1,000, $2,000. And by the time we came back, I had raised about $43,000. And at that point, I was kind of forced into having to think about what to really do with the money, because it was quite a lot that could make a real impact on the ground. And that's when obviously we registered as a nonprofit and began our projects, to protect the Tana Delta. So this is just some images that I put together of some of the things that I managed to do aside from all the stuff on the ground and the walk with rangers. As you can see, last year I was listed in the 2019 100 most influential young Kenyans, and I continue to use this platform to educate and really try and get young people platforms where they're able to either talk about conservation issues or participate directly. Unfortunately, because of the location that we're in, I'm not able to take volunteers myself, but what I do is I redirect them to other organizations and just get them, volunteer placements so that they're able to directly have an impact on the ground. The image that you see on the bottom is the National Judiciary dialogues that we've been doing for several years now. And I joined the kind of initial meetings, which were crucial for me, because when we were making our legislation amendments in 2013, between 2011 and 2013 to be specific, there was a lot of concern, because even though we now had implemented some of the strongest laws in Kenya, possibly even regionally in East Africa, for elephant poaching and the poaching of endangered species, it's now a life sentence. The judiciary didn't understand why it was a life sentence for poaching an elephant. And so we had to really bring them together, all of these judges, and put them in a room and literally do like a 3-day workshop with them, telling them about why elephants are important and why the ivory trade really needs to be stopped. And there were some really interesting things that came out of these meetings. Some of the judges, in fact, even asked us, how do we know that an exhibit that's been brought into the courtroom is ivory and not a cow horn? And so we then had to really almost re-educate them on how to identify certain things, how to be able to tell the difference between a kudu skin and a goat skin, literally. And so it was a really eye-opening experience for me. And then these are just some of my personal highlights. Of course, the ivory burn. And you can see here the former Cabinet Secretary, Honorable Judy Wakungu. This is the former KWS Director, and Johan, who's awesome. He's the current EU ambassador to Ethiopia. And on this day, I invited him to just to see what the ivory burn was like in the background. So obviously everyone was going to see what it looked like on TV and kind of the main event, but there was so much that went on behind the scenes in the preparation of the ivory burn that I was really honored that KWS gave me the opportunity to participate so intimately with this event. So really something that changed a lot of things again in my life. And then finally on the right, when President Obama visited Kenya in 2016, and we were able to have a conversation with civil society, and he basically handpicked 5 people from each sector. So 5 people from conservation, 5 people from women's rights, 5 people from civic education. And really, we had this conversation about the challenges that we're facing in conservation and get his direct sort of guidance and opinions and views about it. So that was something that I really treasure in this journey of mine in conservation. And this is just to give you an idea of the walk with rangers and the impact that we've had so far. You know, we now do it every year. I only take about 10 people every year now. This year we couldn't do it because of COVID, but it's a chance for people to come on to the ground and live with us, you know, eat what we eat, sleep where we sleep, go on desnaring operations with us, and really get a real feel for what it's like to be a ranger on the ground. And through that, we then, and also through our online support, mostly we've been able to provide lots of things for rangers, medical kits. We've trained over 250 rangers to date in first aid, which a lot of rangers had never been trained in first aid before, which was shocking to me. But thankfully, because I've spent so much time with them on the ground, I understand what kind of what the deficits are, as it were, for different ranger groups. And I just try to fill that gap, really, is what I do. Okay, at the bottom it says soon launching our own anti-poaching unit. I should have changed that because we actually launched last year, and we're making progress with that. So yep, that's my story. And yeah, I just I can't get enough of being in the wild, and it's really a passion of mine. And I'm very grateful that I made the transition entirely to move away from the media and get into conservation full time. And I have to say that a lot of people do ask me about how do I make a living. I live with my dad, and he's very supportive, so I'm really thankful for that. But I've never, you know, I would never look back. If I got offered a job in the media again, paying 10 times what I was earning, I wouldn't take it. I'm very happy doing what I do. And I feel like I'm really making an impact and making a difference. And I just want to achieve my goals, really, for Tana Delta and for the East African region, for rangers and for wildlife. And that's what it's all about, really, isn't it? It's just, you have to make every day in your life count on this earth, because otherwise you're just here to take away oxygen, is what I feel. So yeah, thank you so much for listening to my story, and I hope I didn't bore you too much or take too long.
My question is, I know you've had your passion for wildlife since you were on radio, but when did it start, and like what triggered it?
So actually, even though obviously I tried to kind of drive my passion through radio, it had always been there. My dad used to, when I was very, very young, even younger than you, my dad used to take us all to parks all the time. And where we weren't able to go to parks, he would just make sure that we had some kind of exposure to wildlife or to nature. I actually also have lived in Saudi Arabia for 4 years, where there isn't really much wildlife in Jeddah, which is like, yeah, a city. And you know, we weren't allowed to watch cartoons for very long. We would just watch wildlife documentaries. And of course, at the time growing up, you're kind of like, oh, not again, Dad. But you know, now that I'm grown up, I'm so grateful, because that really shaped you know, my passion. It really kind of nurtured that innate passion, which I actually believe that children are born with it, you know, because we're part of this this system, this earth, like we're part of this planet, and children have an innate love for nature and for wildlife. And I see that in my young niece and my young nephew. They're 4 and 9 now. And, you know, they were always like picking up things like slugs and, you know, bugs of every kind and flowers of every kind when they were really young. And I think it's really how children are raised that really informs their interaction with the natural world. But we are part of the natural world, and as such, we're born to love it. We're born to be a part of it and kind of work with it and not against it. And so I feel really strongly about that. And yeah, to answer your question, it just started from very, very young, like even earlier than I can remember personally.
Thank you very much, Raabia. Looking for other questions, hands raised.
Leslie Cornish.
You can unmute Leslie, please. Thank you. Leslie, you can switch on your camera. You're welcome.
Okay.
Sorry, putting you on the spot, Leslie. You're on mute again. You must accept unmute. I'm unmuting. Yeah, there you go. Thank you, Leslie.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for such a brilliant and inspiring presentation. I feel totally ashamed of what I've done with my life, but thank you very much. My question is it possible to go to the Tana region as a tourist? I'd love to go.
Me too.
So, Rod, I'm sure you would manage our place. But to be very honest with you, we don't have any tourism in the Tana Delta region at the moment because it's quite close to the Somali border, which in my next talk, I think we're going to talk about the actual project and kind of, the Tana Delta and conservation in that space and the challenges. Being close to the Somali border, there is the obvious presence of Al-Shabaab. In fact, in December, I had to withdraw my team and I had to do an emergency evacuation because there was an Al-Shabaab attack and they actually came right into the forests where we do our patrols. So because of the security, or actually the insecurity of the region, there isn't really any tourist activity. The closest that you can get to the Tana Delta though is, there is one lodge called the Delta Dunes, which I'll just write that in the messages actually, so you can just look it up. And that's the only tourist facility that I know of that is actually safe. But yeah, I mean, for me, it's really, looking at the theory of stabilization through conservation, where you go into an area that is completely destabilized, has a lot of insecurity. You begin by putting that first layer of security by focusing on the wildlife, and then kind of in tandem with that, you're also helping to protect the communities in a way. And, we just have to try, isn't it? Life is about trial and error. Hopefully we won't make any errors, but yeah, just have to try as much as we can and as best as we can to protect the wildlife in our little conservation space, and then expand that outwards and just hope that it translates into more community goodwill and presence with conservation. There's a lot of interest from the communities in getting engaged in conservation there. But sadly, because the population again in this region is living below the poverty line, it's also very easy for them to get recruited into, unwanted and illegal activities. So my hope is really that aside from protecting the wildlife, we will also start to empower these communities more and elevate their livelihoods in some way, directly or indirectly, whether it's hiring people from the communities as rangers, or whether it's giving them some kind of, we're also going to introduce at some point a livelihoods program under the foundation. So yeah, the instability is a huge issue for us. If we had tourism in the area, and if it was viable for tourism in the next 10 years, 20 years, whatever, we could have relied on that for our conservation efforts. But unfortunately, it is what it is. So, but hopefully one day it will be safe enough. And when it is, I do hope that you will visit, because it is absolutely stunning.
Thank you, Raabia. Before we give Ruan Smith a chance for his question, there's a question in the chat What is the age restriction doing the walk? So we're probably looking at higher than lower age here. Can you respond to that, please, Raabia?
Sure. So we don't actually have like a maximum age limit. We've had a 63-year-old lady who was the oldest who joined our walk. We've had a 54-year-old. So there isn't a maximum. There is a minimum, though, obviously. We don't take under 19s unless they are accompanied by, you know, a guardian, like a legal guardian, or yeah, or somebody from the family. We have had a lot of requests, particularly from young people and from parents wanting their 15-year-olds and 16-year-olds to join. So every year we have taken one minor, for lack of a better description. We had a 15-year-old and a 16-year-old on the 2 years consecutively, who joined with a cousin and with a mom. And, you know, it was great because I think it brings like a fresh dynamic to the group. And all the ages and people coming from different countries, they're able to gel really well. So as long as you send us an email, and again, we're not open for the Walk with Rangers this year because of COVID, but if you send us an email, then we add you to our mailing list, and then send you like an alert or a notification when we're open for our next registration. And yeah, my team will answer any questions that you have through there.
Thank you, Raabia. We have a candidate of 66 who would like to join, but we're not going to discuss that now. Ruan Smith, please unmute Ruan Smith.
Done.
Rohan
Hi.
Sant.
Yes. So I had a question. You were talking about getting projects done throughout Eastern Africa. How do you count on doing those in Ethiopia, Somalia, and I mean, you already worked in Tanzania, so I wanted to know how you do those.
So at the moment, we're only in Kenya, but we have done some work with rangers in Tanzania. One of my passions, or kind of my goals, is to really try and find a way to do a forum where we are bringing together rangers from the Eastern African region collectively to sit down and have like a shared experiences talk, because I feel like we have so much that we can learn from each other with regards to the different, you know, learning about the different methods that poachers are using in different regions. Just within Kenya, the poaching methods vary between conservation areas. So like you'll have, you know, poisoning and poison arrows, and using poisoned fruits is more prevalent in the Savos and in the coast. And then in the Mara, you have more prevalence of automatic weapons. And so we really have a lot to learn from each other. But unfortunately, you know, with the way the situation is on the ground, we just, yeah, most of the time you can't afford to give rangers like a week off or anything. So it's something that is, it's in my eyeline. Like I really want to do it, and I hope that I'll be able to achieve that very soon. And then through working with the rangers, obviously expanding into different ways that we can support conservation in, you know, regionally. But for now, we're still small.
Right. I mean, do you think of it being possible through like these webinars? Is that a viable option? I mean, it sounds quite interesting.
Yeah, so I've, you know, obviously the COVID thing has kind of opened my eyes to webinars. I've always been like in the field, and I'm more of a very direct person to person kind of girl. Like I like having physical meetings, and I just feel like I achieve more that way. But I really like the webinar, obviously system and flow is very convenient for everyone. So yeah, I would have to give it a think when we're ready to take that step. And find like different options and what would be the best way to get it done. And of course, we also have to take into account the network situation, because like for us, where we are, there's zero network at all. Like there's only one hill that has network in the entire conservation area. So yeah, that's also a factor that I would need to really consider.
Wow. Thanks, Raabia. Looking for other hands raised. Okay, it seems to me we are done. All right, there, Janssen, we are unmuting you. Marit, Janssen Davies, please.
Raabia, wonderful talk. Thank you very much. Very inspirational.
Thank you.
Can you tell me what has happened to the area where the Tana River Primate National Reserve was, and I think it was deproclaimed, I don't know when, about 2007, 2008, around there somewhere. Is that the area that you're operating? That's where the primates are, the mangabees, I think, colobus?
No, so that is the Tana River Primate Reserve, which is currently being managed by KWS, but there is an ongoing conflict between KWS, the county government, because as you know, we shifted our entire governance system and we now have counties. And so the KWS, the county government, and the communities are now kind of battling for ownership / management of the primate reserve. So it's not a wonderful situation. I don't think it's going to get anywhere anytime soon because of obviously the insecurity, the insurgency, and just the constant flooding that's happening there at the moment. But you know, there still is quite a healthy population of red colobus and the Tana River manga bay. And the population has even moved further down south to areas like Onkolde, Baomo, and like that a little bit further down river. Where our location is the place called Kipini. I'm just gonna type it into the chat so you can look it up. And Kipini is near Mpeketoni town, so it's literally like at the mouth of the river where it joins the ocean. I'm gonna just see if I can have a look on it on a map. Just give me 1 second, and then I will just draw up the map and show you exactly where we are. 1 second. Okay, so I'm just about to do a screen share in a moment when it shows me what I want to see. Minute. So 1 second, I'm gonna do a screen share, guys.
Okay, you should be able to.
Okay, there you go.
Okay, you're into it.
So you can see here, I've just typed into Google Kipini and you can have a look at, it's just, yeah, completely virgin beach. So that's Kipini. This is Tana River. That's where it meets the ocean. And this is our zone here, this forested patch, all this. So that's where, I'm just going to switch to satellite actually. It might, yeah,
Use it a little bit, there you go.
This forested patch right here. And that's where the river comes in to meet the ocean. So yeah, this zone here is where we are.